It's dead zone time here. Alright. I like to record the meditation when my radio program, the Dead Zone, is on as a way of doing some simultaneity. And in the background is the Dead Zone celebration of what's considered to be the most widely traded show. May 8th, 1977, from Barton Hall at Cornell. Let me lower that and begin reading because this is a long meditation. On the 18th day of May, 2004. Read this day, May 18th, 2014. The beckoning of language gathers together the community of learning in the appeal it makes to poetic dwelling. To say language gathers is to identify the abode that emerges from the building activity of hearing. In this we acknowledge hearing as the originary stance of poetic dialogue. The hearing is the silence that awaits for and receives the beckoning of language, prepares the way and conserves the clearing for the arrival of the ineffable. Within this silence we identify the truth of concealment as the primordial gap that conserves the not yet, the possibility embedded in the said. Hearing frees the said into the saying that is a pointing, a conveyance, a message to be received and retold. Heidegger's insight into the link between dwelling, peace, and freedom bears repeating here. Quote, "We do not dwell because we have built, but we build because we dwell. That is, because we are dwellers. But in what does the essence of dwelling consist? Let us listen once more to what language says. The old Saxon wuin, the Gothic wunien, like the word bowen, means to remain, to stay in place. But the Gothic wunien says more distinctly how this remaining is experienced. Wunien means to be at peace, to be brought to peace, to remain in peace. The word for peace, Friede, means the free, das frei. And frei means preserved from harm, danger, preserved from something, safeguarded. To free actually means to spare. And the sparing itself consists not only in the fact that we do not harm the one whom we spare. Real sparing is something positive and takes place when we leave something before it in its own essence. The fundamental character of dwelling is this sparing." End quote. If the fundamental character of poetic dwelling is preservation, freedom and peace as the safeguarding of sparing, then building is the bringing about of peace, the cultivation and construction of peace and freedom. This is the fundamental inherent aim of the learning community, to cultivate and construct the abode of peace and freedom through poetic dialogue. The work of the community gets underway and continues its work with learning. The work is initiated by the sage whose evocative speech announces the beckoning of the ineffable and gathers the community into the proper dwelling of dialogue. The sage dwells poetically, which means she speaks with the being of language, quote, "with the being of language, as saying that shows rest on appropriation, which takes a human over to the releasement in which she can listen freely. Therefore, the way-making of saying into speech first opens up for us the paths along which our thinking can pursue the authentic way of language," unquote, from Heidegger. As the Heraclitus tale depicted, the sage prepares the guide and guides his visitors, those who arrive ready and willing to be engaged in painstaking listening, into the abode of poetic dwelling. This abode constitutes the place of building, the learning which builds the community of peace and freedom through poetic dialogue. This abode is the place of learning is the location of the gathering where the twofold play of concealment appearance unfolds. We identify this abode as language, the symbolic. Quote, language is the house of being because language as saying is the mode of appropriation. Language appearing in the evocative speech of saying is the place of building which gathers and safeguards the cultivation of peace and freedom. Learning unfolds in this gathering, as the poet Holderlin sings in his celebration of peace. Much from the morning onwards, since we have been a discourse and have heard from one another, humankind has learnt that soon we shall be song. The celebration of peace marks the cultivation of peace and freedom. Community unfolds in the gathering where learning takes place. This abode which shelters and safeguards is the safe passage or sparing way. This abode is this path the apprentice finds when he makes his leap from knowing to thinking. Thinking is the learning that gets underway by the beckoning of language, by the reception of the ineffable, by the silence that hears the appeal offered by the evocative saying. And learning is the building that cultivates peace and freedom through the reckoning of friendship. Here we recall the proclamation of Socrates. This, gentlemen, was the doctrine of Diotima. I was convinced, and in that conviction I try to bring others to the same creed, and to convince them that if we are to make this gift our own, love will help our mortal nature more than all the world. And here, too, we better understand why the sage, the one who gathers, dwells poetically as the mediator, or the one who stands most authentically within the twofold play of hearing and speaking. The poetic dwelling of the sage reveals the truth of dialogue, is the learning that celebrates peace and freedom, and is a constant waiting for song and steadfast openness. To repeat what we said earlier, this steadfast openness is maintained through the rigor of hearing, of painstaking listening. This hearing is the deposing of the authoritative juridical voice, a removal from the power of the self-certain, smug subject. The sage remains steadfast and with conviction. The sage has deposed the I that stands apart against and above in order to cultivate a common world with others whom he calls friends in the project of building the community of freedom and peace. Thus, the deposing is a removing and a replacing. To draw into questionable is to place, poser. But while deposing means removing from high authority, it also means to bear witness, to testify. To bear up, to endure cheerfully the tidings of the tide, is thus to bear witness to the lore. But to depose is also to divest oneself, to put aside. You see how being reposed, held out into the nothing, to emptiness, is a divestment, an emptying, an opening, a waiting, a receiving. Here we see how bearing up is a bearing witness, and enduring cheerfully is the teaching which lets nothing else happen but learning, by the teacher who is more teachable than her apprentices. Socrates is called friend of the gods and friend of the mortals. He is both apprentice, the one who receives, the teacher, the one who gives. And this is why he sought, quote, to cultivate and worship love and bid others the same. That's from Symposium 212b. The sage is the mediator, preserves the gathering of nature, mortal and divine. She calls her visitors to join her with the invocation, for here too the gods are present. And that's how it ends this day, the 18th of May, 2014, originally written 10 years ago.